to go live.
Yes.
Got it. We could be live.
I think we are live right now.
Yeah, it generally happens where there's a bit of a lag. Yep, boom, we're live. I see it. And now I need to mute it. Otherwise, I will hear myself talking a minute later. And that's very frustrating.
Okay, anyone watching, stay tuned because this is going to kick off in like 10 seconds. And go.
Hi, I'm Craig. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome to yet another talk with myself and Jahan. Today we're going to be talking about data science and unreasonable expectations. It's a bit of a background. I am an independent consultant. I work primarily with banks and other financial companies. And Jahan? I
am a product manager. I work in a software company in tech, obviously. I used to be a data analyst. I've got 4 years experience as a data analyst, doing a variety of things from very basic, simple analysis that was very statistically heavy to more machine learning and other types of things, but probably much less than what Craig's done, I would say, given the amount of years he's been here. But that's, I can see by his bulging eyeballs there that he doesn't believe me, but I do stand by it still.
Well, yeah, I probably have more quantity, but I don't know about quality. Remember, I'm very against machine learning AI. I'm quite the skeptic. And
I am as well.
Ooh, after working in it, I see you two have seen the dark side.
I mean, I've done it, and I think it's just more. It's like a bullshit generator in conversations the level above. Like, I'm not saying that it is bullshit. I think it's very powerful and it's great. But if you're working with machine learning or someone starts throwing around the word AI, they'll typically expect you to do magic in no time. And machine learning, there's only so much you can do with linear algebra and multivariate calculus. Like, after a while, it is just maths. It's not magic. So unrealistic expectations tends to set you off on the wrong path straight away.
Yeah. So that's a good introduction to this unreasonable expectations kind of concept. Is because I agree with you that there's certainly many organizations out there that seem to have this belief that if they can get AI ML running, or if they can hire enough data scientists, data analysts, data engineers, ML ops, DevOps, all of the titles that loosely combine to form Voltron, I mean data science, then suddenly everything will be great without understanding the parts of it. So if we go back to kind of when you started, I know we've talked about some of your experiences with organizations who can remain nameless, or if you're feeling spunky, fiery, whatever, you can name names if you'd like. But so when you started during this whole data science career, what did you think of the expectations? And what was your first job ad like that you applied for?
The first job I applied for, I applied for a job at Forethought, and you applied there as well. And I'm naming names there because I think their interview process was pretty good. I think they knew what they were looking for, and they tested pretty well for it. They gave me a case study. It was very much, they were very much looking for someone with a reasonable statistical background and understanding of how to get consumer insights from survey data, which is my background. It was psychology. Econometrics would have probably been better, but like psychology was perfectly fine. My programming skills were really limited, but they kind of knew that they could work on that. The thing they struggled more with was taking someone who could, do a bunch of coding in Python, R, SQL, whatever, and get them to kind of really think, about how you collect data from representative samples, make inferences, and build a linear model. Like that tends to be a little bit harder to teach in the job because you typically need to have, a few courses up your sleeve, and obviously sort of having a psych degree, that's basically what most psychology research is, although it's often butchered, I'll be honest, but it's the same approach. So that was a good experience, because I think looking at then the more machine learning heavy, the people with that kind of background, they kind of struggled there because they found the work boring, and the tech was not necessarily the most advanced. But I think they knew what they did and they knew what they needed, and that was good. And on occasion, like any place, they might hire people with the fancier skill set because it was exciting. Every place does that, and kind of every place probably should to some degree. And they didn't do it more like some places they only hire those people, and they find very quickly that they're in trouble because they don't know what to do with them. And those people aren't like digital strategists or like data science leaders, they're data scientists. And so there's kind of this massive gap between, you know, people with a very lofty idea of what the business needs to do, and then these people that can do very technical things if you give them the right, you know, guidance and direction. So yeah, I mean, that was a really good experience because there wasn't that massive gap between what was expected by the business and what was actually needed. So yeah, that was a fairly positive experience, generally speaking. And yeah, that was my first one. What about you?
Yeah, so I applied for Forethought, and I never heard anything. I was one of the kind of canonical, and then the CV goes out and you hear nothing. Not even a thank you for your application. I might have gotten an automated thank you for your application, but certainly no formal rejection or call for an interview with Forethought, which was a bit that whole getting ghosted thing always hurts, but it happens at all levels. So certainly if you're a grad and you're sending your CVs in and not hearing a reply, it happens even to people with 20 years experience. Don't well, I can say don't let it get to you, but since I let it get to me, that's a bit hypocritical on my part to say don't let it get to you, right?
Oh, I know. It definitely, it always stings, especially when you put a bit of effort into it, and all I need to hear is just a good job, sorry. That would pretty much do. Yeah, but what about then when it comes to like experiences that are positive and negative, what kind of stand out for you? Obviously, you know, naming names when you feel it's appropriate only.
Yeah, so I've made a couple LinkedIn posts about this because I'm currently between roles, and so I'm looking and sending out applications. And the most recent one was there was someone looking for an analytics consultant. So part of what I want to go into here is the language isn't always standardized. So when I say analytics consultant, what level is that to you, in your opinion?
Any level.
Oh, okay.
Like,
right.
I mean, so it should be, to me, it should be a data scientist, or data scientist or data analyst or any technical data professional that does consulting. That's to me what it should be, but I've seen in practice it differ from that pretty widely.
Yeah. So to me, once you say consultant, in my opinion, there's a certain level of seniority implied that you will be sought for advice on how to do things. So I go and I fill out the application, and they ask me what my ATAR was. Now, since I did not go to school in Australia, I don't have an ATAR.
Yeah, I saw your post.
And I was looking at it going, really? And literally I wrote, question mark, and submitted it to that. to that. And I understand this may jeopardize the possibility of me getting a role there, but so be it. There was a certain amount of, I can't believe I wrote a cover letter for this. And they were asking what, you know, which area is your superpower? And I'm kind of going, if you're concerned about ATAR, how much superpower do you think people have exactly? Select up to 5 industries. If you've worked in 5 industries and you're still using ATAR as an example, like what's going on? It was a very strange, and they wanted all of my transcripts, and I wasn't going to find all of my academic transcripts to upload them. I just was not. I had already spent enough time on this. I was done. So even that, the job ad itself was fine, but what they were expecting of me was, I don't know, almost insulting, because it's sort of like, how did you do all these standardized tests? Was very strange, in my opinion.
What would you have thought of them giving you a standardized test instead?
So I had one of those. I had a coding challenge. The coding challenge environment I was in didn't have any debugging features, at least none that I saw.
Oh, that's right.
So that was very exciting. And then they wanted me to do something in Java when I never said I knew Java. So I was always going to fail this coding challenge. But what's interesting is that kind of workflow was all automated. And by that, I mean, I applied, I got an email saying, thank you very much, sign up for the coding test. I signed up for the coding test. I went through it. I got another email that said, hey, you scored 100 out of 300. You need to score at least 210. I'm sorry. You can appeal if you'd like. I didn't appeal, and I got a message saying, okay, we're closing it. Thank you for applying, but no. And that's great in a sense, because I knew exactly what happened. I was informed promptly. And although it was kind of a cluster, in my opinion, it was better than, and I send in my CV and I hear nothing.
That's true. That's true. At least you know what you could have done to have got to the next stage. And, you probably were at that point, pretty happy not to. So it was probably
exactly. But that's another thing that I think might be hard for grads and people looking for their first data science job to hear is, at that point, maybe you're glad you didn't get it, because especially if you're struggling to keep up a visa or stay in your house, maintain your standard of living, support your family, etc. It can be strange to think, well, I had this job, I got pretty far along, and then, oh, it didn't come through. Shucks. But other times it's like, oh, and it didn't come through. Hooray.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, I think I have been to a few job interviews where I've seen red flags. The weirdest one was and this is not analytics at all, but this is funny. I applied for a job, and I was applying for a lot of jobs at this point. I was looking to get out of ESL teaching. This is back many moons ago. And in this interview, I think on the questionnaire, they asked, do you have a degree? They also said, like, do you have a master's, something like that. And this job was like basic sales, and it was very ambiguous. They didn't really tell you much about it. And then they got you to do a trial run where you went to this car park and you just walk around with this car wash product and try and schluck it to people. And I'm like, they asked for a degree. Like, that almost would remind me that I might think that, I'm worth a bit more than like hanging out and harassing people in a shop, in a shopping center for $20 a pop sales. Like, it was ridiculous. But there are some places where they just literally have so many applicants. Like, there is a bit of I wouldn't say a cottage industry, but there's a thing where, like, especially data analysts, like, if you get maybe management consultants, there'd be people there that are pretty ambitious, and I'd say that, and they typically would index pretty high on communication skills. Whereas if you have like just a very smart but quiet person that doesn't know how to talk to senior stakeholders in an impressive way with the fancy words, even though their thoughts are far more sophisticated, a lot of those people may not quite know their worth, so they'll get lured into these crappy jobs, and they'll be uploading their ATAR, they'll be uploading their transcripts, and they'll get 230 or 240 and get past the hurdle requirement for 210, and they might be pretty grateful to have a job, but they probably shouldn't be, because it should be the other way around.
Yeah, and that's something it took me a while to really understand, is the interview process is two ways. And that if a company is hiring, then they have a job they need to get done. And if it's kind of a bit of a union or socialist system, where if data scientists or data analysts in general say, no, this isn't good enough, and they don't hire anyone and their job doesn't get done, then something has to happen. It's part of the, the great resignation theory in the US is, I busted my butt to maintain everything during the pandemic, and now party, not party, but now I'm doing my own thing, and I'm reevaluating my life. Whether or not that the numbers stack up is another thing, but it's an interesting narrative anyway.
Yeah, interesting how that plays out. I did want to jump onto one thing you said there, which was kind of the job that data scientists do, and and that's kind of I think the mismatch of expectations, because, like, if we just talk about your average data analyst role, and we can get into data scientist later. Just start with a data analyst role, just your average company that needs an analytics professional. When we talk about data analyst, we're not being very prescriptive about exactly what that is, so we probably want to define it first. But once you define it, then, like, well, what is it what's needed? If you're a grad, what should you focus on? If you're mid-level career, what's the focus? And if you're further on, what's the focus afterwards?
Yeah, so here's where I again want to bring in that it's two ways in terms of what should you focus on as someone pursuing a job versus what does that tend to mean on the side of the company when they're looking for someone. Because right? I'm an R user, so I'm not going to go and apply for jobs at Python houses. Right?
Yeah.
It's just not worth the time. So part of what it means to be a data analyst, in my opinion, is to look out and say, okay, of the people looking for data analysts, what skills do they have, and how do you position yourself in order to get one? So for example, a lot of data analyst jobs I see are doing all of their data analysis in Excel. So they're making pivot tables, they're doing segmentation, they might be doing some random sampling, linear regression, basic charts, do Excel. But then the question becomes, well, do you want a job where you're going to be an Excel person?
Yeah.
There's plenty of them. And if you go down that rabbit hole and you start learning Power Query and VBA and some of the data sourcing methods into Excel, there's a lot to learn there.
Yeah.
But then you'll be using Excel forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I can't think of many fates worse than that, to be honest. I mean, I see like that would be the two extremes there, like being Excel all day when you really need a database, or you really need R or Python. That's terrible. And then the other extreme for me would be working in Scala. Like at Quantium, they're using Scala for a while, and because it's a language of Spark, it initially made sense. But then, you know, Sparkly R and PySpark and stuff came so far, you could kind of skip a lot of that stuff. You still have to be aware of the, you know, the fact that it's a distributed cluster rather than a normal kind of relational database. But for the most part, a lot of this stuff was abstracted away, and you could use loops, you didn't have to use recursion, all that kind of stuff. But I remember just thinking with Scala, I was like, I hate this. I want nothing to do with this. This is way too technical and fiddly and just like it's so far away from what I enjoy. But then like I play with just Excel when I shouldn't be, like for use cases that need a tool that can scale a bit better, and you know, you need some coding essentially. That's when I find I'm hating my life, and I'm finding my computer's struggling because they don't have enough RAM and disk space. So yeah.
Right, but there will be other people that love Excel, that love the ability to write VBA code, that love Power Query, that love all the things it can do. And it's pretty impressive what you can do in Excel. The fact that Excel is often used as a data solution is rather frightening, but you know, it is what it is. And so this is part of my kind of advice is find a technology that you like and run with it, but make sure you know the value proposition as to why you do that.
Yeah.
So you can say, hey, if all of your data are in Excel because you're a very small company and you do everything manually, so be it. With that, I can do wonders. Fine, that's a certain niche market. Versus, okay, I know how to use Excel, but I also use SQL so that I can not only do these wonderful things for you, but I can go out and source the data as well, so that things aren't just, you know, Excel is not necessarily a data solution, but if you have your database, if you have the data in the cloud, whatever that means, if you're using MongoDB or graph databases or what have you, I can manipulate the data to get it into Excel so I can do all these pretty things.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best basic combination. I'd say like Excel and SQL would definitely be my big recommendation for anyone out there who's looking to get a job in analytics, because you can get 95% of the stuff you'll need to do if you're in the first 2 to 4 years of your career in analytics and not, you know, actively working on like a machine learning team or something like that, some team that's doing super fancy stuff, which is most people, right? And I think it's good to like, because one thing we haven't touched on yet is like the actual incidence of different tools. Because if you're like, I worked with a guy, a very, very smart guy. His background is like, I think he had a PhD. It was a PhD in software engineering. He worked as a software developer before. He also had 10 years experience in like machine learning, like data science. Like he was looking at X-rays in Python using NumPy and essentially doing a whole bunch of deep learning to detect cancer, which is pretty cool. It's the sexy stuff, right? And he had to do a business case, some very simple analysis, and he wanted to do it. He insisted on doing it in Python, and this one manager was getting quite flustered with him, saying, "Just do it in Excel, like that way." He was like, "That way I can look at it too." But he was just like, "Excel, no, I hate it." He knew his niche, but he was kind of in an environment where that wasn't really going to work. So like, I mean, it did not work. They basically made it clear that that's not the kind of work you give him, and it worked out well. Like, they were under leveraging him by giving him that work. But I think that's an important thing. Like, think about how often, like, how viable it is. Like, if you're an Alteryx person where you have to have Alteryx to work, those licenses aren't cheap, right? You're asking for, the company to either buy you the software every year, which they need to then factor into your salary, or work in a place that already uses Alteryx. So, like, I guess, so technology does matter. Like, if everyone stops using R and suddenly just goes for Python, like, you might need to change at that point. Hopefully it doesn't happen. I love R too.
Yeah. Well, I've already done that because I was a MATLAB guy. I used to only use MATLAB, but as you mentioned, but then people had to have a MATLAB license, or you could use Octave, which was kind of the open source version of MATLAB, because MATLAB itself was built on numerical recipes in Fortran originally, I think. Then they upgraded the back end to C.
Interesting, because MATLAB, I think R was built initially on Fortran, wasn't it?
Yeah, or R was S, right? And some of that, well, there's a history there that I'm certainly not an expert in. Maybe I shouldn't be discussing too much on the podcast, because there'll be some person watching this who's like, no, you don't understand.
By all means, correct us. I'm definitely even less knowledgeable in that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the first thing I think about when giving this type of advice, is to understand your niche, know your niche, whether it's Excel or Alteryx or what were some of the other things you mentioned? SQL, Scala?
SQL, Scala, Python.
Yeah, Python. So you had asked about data analyst as a title. In my opinion, data analyst is you use little to no mathematical modeling.
Oh, okay.
That is primarily looking at current/historical data, maybe some forecasting, maybe some linear regression, logistic regression, etc. But in my opinion, data analysts are mostly, let's look at the data we have, not the predictions to the future.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable definition. I just find, though, it's just it's so inconsistent. And I find in practice that data scientist is just a fancy way of saying highly competent and skilled data analyst. Because at Quantium, for example, everyone was called data analyst just because everyone's a data analyst. So, like, either you call everyone a data scientist because there were a lot of people there that were some of the most advanced data scientists I've ever worked with. And then there are a lot of people there that really would fit the definition of data analyst. And it would feel like a kind of two-tier society if you gave one term to one group and another to another. Now, obviously, you could if it was just purely skill-based, but then there's a thing where then data scientists, when you give them data analyst work, it becomes like they become quite wedded to they match their title to what they actually do and would be willing to do. And sometimes, like, you might be a data scientist, you might be able to write production grade code, but someone needs you to pull some numbers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that might have been the fear there. I don't know exactly why. Like, it might have just also been they've been around for a while. They don't want to suddenly just go changing titles up because of what's in vogue.
Yeah, so, but it is interesting to see the title evolution. So, like, DevOps, I don't remember as a title 10 years ago, and ML Ops certainly not.
No, that's super new.
So there's that kind of branch too of, do you want to be the coding software engineer? Because most of the R code I write isn't production. Sometimes it's that kind of mix where you're using production data, so therefore it's production code, and it's under GitHub, but it might not have the formal life cycle with what's your production, what's production, or a main branch and dev branch, and take bug requests or feature requests and prioritize them, and all of that machinery on top of it.
And I think I separate the dev, like the software engineering side of it from, like, I see data scientists and data analysts as being the people that work on the discovery side. The implementation side, at least, like, they help provide specs and requirements to the data, like to the ML ops and data engineering and data management people. And then at that point, other people will productionize that stuff and make sure it's highly performant and, won't break won't break everything. Whereas, the data scientists will be more interested in like, okay, if we scale this out to 1 million customers, this recommender system, are we going to have garbage like recommendations going out? How bad will it be? Blah, 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 like sensitivity, specificity. Whereas like, I don't expect that a software engineer in ML even really knows what those things are, or they can know what they are, but they don't need to. Like they'd be more looking at them to say like, okay, well, like how fast can this render? How fast can they do this query? Like what's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and in terms of what's reasonable and unreasonable, I don't know if organizations have the same distinction that you and I might have about what's production grade code and who writes it. Is it the data scientist? Because I meet people who are these full stack developers, and it's just sort of like, it seems like a lot for one person that you're doing all of that. Really? Like, is that the expectation? So when looking at some of these job ads, I often wonder, like, is this reasonable, or are they looking for unicorns, or are they just looking for people that they will burn out in a year and find another one? Have you had any experience with, like, how big of a role have you seen?
Oh, I've definitely seen roles where,
I mean filled roles that people are doing, not job ads that people are asking for the world.
Yeah, because there's a lot of those around. I'd say that typically it's quite rare, but like the most I'd see would be like, that someone with like a very strong mathematical background that loves coding, that is writing stuff that almost is pretty close to production quality, but then, they'd have actual devs to implement it, because like I've never seen any decent team try to do both. I've seen shit shows before where people just do dump, like, it's just a mess. And, that's where there's like, data analysts doing data management and stuff like that. I've been in that situation. It sucks. But any place that gives a shit about quality will typically not let that happen. Like for example, at Quantium, I worked with one guy. He had a background, his like education was actuarial science, and he knew machine learning really well. But he was a front-end engineer. He taught himself, and he got a job as a front-end dev while studying. So grads were joining Quantium as data analysts, and he was like in his second year as a like not a non-entry level hire. Like he came in as a lateral hire. It's kind of wild. Like I imagine studying with someone and seeing them at your first job and they're already like, 3 years ahead of you. It's insane. But that guy's a bit of a genius, but he didn't do data like science work. Like he was involved in conversations and meetings because he was interested and he was capable, but he had no responsibility there. Like he'd get tickets, there'd be things he'd be implementing. He'd do back-end stuff on occasion. So he'd, I think, jump in on occasion, but he was a dev doing dev work, and it would be unreasonable to give him more responsibilities than that because there's a shitload already.
Yeah,
So,
I've seen at Raytheon, there were people that would develop algorithms and write the flight code, but it became scary and the key person risk became huge.
Yeah.
Because they would approve their own changes and push it to prod.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and so, but they were some of the smartest people I've ever met doing this. But at the same time, there's a bit of, can we get a second set of eyes? Can we get all the test logs and all the, and he was a little, I don't know, almost offended that people were asking for some of these governance artifacts because, of course he had it under control. And for the most part, to his credit, he did. But when it came time for flight tests, it was, no, we're doing something else first because, bring in the outside consultants, bring someone else, independent validation unit, red team, blue team within the organization, something, rather than, no, this guy just handled it all.
Yeah. I think that's one thing I think that separates data analysts from like developers is that if you're a developer, you do what is asked of you and you simply just implement it. And there's heaps of exceptions. Like there's heaps of developers that have a really good sense of business acumen, and their brain is very much turned on at all times. But there are many who just, they see the work and they focus on the technical implementation side of it, and they don't have much context as to exactly how it should work beyond what they've been told. And, to their credit, they're doing it because they're just very, very good at what they do. That's the whole point. This is specialization. But I see that like with data analysts, like, yeah, you need to be able, like, at least the good ones, you need to know, like, and this is actually someone asked you. I see it as like the data analyst's responsibility to understand from where the data is produced, how it gets in there, to then whatever you do from it. Like that whole, you should understand that whole transformation process and know what things mean. So if all of a sudden you get a massive spike in something, you should have a sense of all the possible things that could have gone wrong to produce that before you assume that, everyone's selling heaps of product and everything's great. You should tell the CEO. Like, whereas like, I think the mentality of a developer is more around the quality of just getting that, executing that. At least that's where the responsibility can be. Like, and that's not every developer. It's just in terms of expectation, that's what the expectation typically would be. What do you think about that as a thing that data analysts should own?
Yeah, it's the whole concept of ownership, I think, is something that doesn't get covered enough in data classes. That if there's an analysis that's done from a governance point of view, someone needs to own it or own the result. Someone needs to own the input data. Someone needs to own, the verification of that data.
Yeah.
All those governance steps don't get enough attention, in my opinion. Certainly because at the university or learning this on some course is, okay, you wrote some code. If I give it this input, do I get the output I expected? Yes or no? And everyone, like as a student, you own your own work. As a teacher, you kind of own the assessment of the student's work. But having some process of saying, and then we will run these tests, and these are the expected outcomes of the tests. So, and by the way, as you're writing code, it's not just if I give you this data, what happens, but are you coming up with the tests of, okay, what if I'm computing mutual information on two vectors? Do I check to see if there are different lengths? Do I check to see if there are missing values or zeros or negative numbers for probabilities?
Oh yeah.
The ability to come up with these tests is a skill, really, that I don't know how it gets taught, or if it gets taught in data analyst, data science type classes.
It's interesting, actually. I was working with a data analyst some time ago, and we were coming up with some metrics. And this is when I was a product manager, and we're coming up with metrics. So metrics definition, for me, that's a data analyst thing. And the curious thing was that, and I think this person was very time poor, so it's not to say they couldn't do it, but they came up with numbers where I looked at their table, and it's looking at the time between two events to come up with a metric for success. And I was getting negative numbers. So people were doing things with, something that doesn't exist yet. So they created a page, and then they were adding stuff to it before the page existed. So
foresight.
Yeah, exactly. Something was on the ball. But no, I went through and asked the engineers how this could be happening, and it turns out it's okay, if you delete a page and then bring it back again, you'll get they'll reuse the primary key or the table ID, that page ID. So then you'll get that match will be on the latest one, and then you'll have things from before as the earliest event that matches to it. And it's just the kind of thing that I was kind of expecting that kind of stuff to be totally taken care of. As a data analyst, that was the stuff that freaked me out. I was always constantly paranoid about making a mistake. So I would always just go through and check the shit out of my work. So I had zero faith in my own ability. So part of it was probably fueled by massive insecurity, but it did teach me some good habits though. Because and just to kind of maybe you should give some context, and this is partly to share ideas with you. Take the Titanic data set that anyone watching here could get access to pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's one of the existing competitions on Kaggle.
Yeah.
Is how I know it. Yeah.
It's
anyway, go ahead.
Total cliche. That and the Iris data set, and maybe empty cars are the three most commonly used ones. And I think it's a pretty boring classification problem. You basically get similar scores all the time, unless you just hack it because you manage to cheat and bleed in the you can get 99% if you know which ones actually survive and just hack an algorithm. But anyway, like as a data professional, you'd approach it very differently to the way you do in Kaggle. Like if you're looking at ticket numbers and you get these different like decks and you get different, like there's different information in there, there's different things that are missing. You want to know, like, is there a different level of missingness between males and like in the data across males and females? Like I think some of the data around like price, I think is missing, or a bunch of things. Like you'd want to make sure that every little line on that, you know, every row of data, you see a whole bunch of random little values there. They're not always clear what they mean, and you need to really know that stuff. Otherwise, when you do stuff with it, it might misbehave, and you might not know why until you look at that. So that's the kind of thing. Like not just, okay, yes, obviously a lot more men die than women, given how, you know, how it's women and children first, etc. And typically, if you're richer, you're more likely to survive. That's the very basic stuff that anyone would know. But as a data professional, it's like, okay, there's a C hyphen blah 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 that actually refers to the cabin name, the room name, etc. Like it gives you, that's all the, because you're trying to get value from information, so you need to know what the information is. You can't just, you know, throw algorithms and code at it and hope it all just works out.
Right. So for the to unpack that, and again in terms of what's reasonable to expect, because one of my big hypotheses is something that makes a data scientist is the engagement with the business, the understanding of the data.
Yes.
Is that the data scientist's job to know that, or to ask that, or to, like, would you expect a data analyst to look at these ticket numbers and say, this one begins with C and these begin with A and B? Like, does that mean something? Can I feature engineer that to extract more information from this ticket number? And you'll see this with IDs. I think you asked a question on LinkedIn that if you include the ID, then you get, like, it becomes a good predictor, because there might be something embedded within the ID.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very simple, straightforward answer, which is like, your job is to ask. You're engaging in discovery, you're engaging and trying to extract value from information. So you should be appending, you know, to the data, knowledge from experts, because typically, like that's why I see the examples of like projects where people do embarrassing things like, you know, predicting that, you know, you're more likely to churn if you like receive like communication blah, and then people are like, yeah, that's a churn, that's a like, sorry, you're leaving us message. Like obviously they mainly churn. Like you get things like that kind of happening. Like obviously not as obvious as that, but things where people are like going, there's no value here. Like you're telling us stuff we do know, and then the stuff that we don't know, we don't really trust, and you don't either. So
right. Yep. But do you think that should be called out explicitly, like in a job ad, if you're looking for a data analyst, data scientist, to say, we expect you to chase down all these data things? Or do you think it's reasonable to say, hey, I'm a data scientist, you give me the data dictionary and I'll go from there? How do you think that plays out?
I think it's kind of in the middle. Like I think you need, like when so we're talking to like what's reasonable for data, like what's reasonable and what's someone's role and responsibility. So like you might have, like for me, a super team, a dream team would be one person that is like the database person, and they can handle SQL and ideally also like, you know, Spark environments as well. And they kind of almost could become like a you know, a database engineer, like a data engineer, but they've kind of moved more. They're still a member of the team, and then there's someone who's more like the business side person, which would typically be me. And, you know, they're building relationships with people, they understand how things work, but they're still working, you know, they're still writing code and doing all the stuff, except they're the person that will go out and, you know, answer, you know, if someone's like, what's that mean? They'll be the person that will kind of be the dog with the bone, running out, trying to find out what it means, and will either look in the data and investigate or go ask people. And if it's not known, that's when it's good to try and use, you know, data science to figure it out. And then you have like, you know, maybe you're more like, you know, machine learning kind of mathematically oriented person that just knows algorithms really well and will be really good at, you know, figuring out how to turn it into a machine learning problem that will actually be performant and work, etc. Like I see this as a mix of skills, and companies should probably call out in the job ad what they're looking for in that team member, because they should hire for that. Otherwise, if you get all the first type, you get people who can write great queries and look after a really nice, pristine database and get, you know, shit all done from the business's perspective, because there's no like relationship building, etc.
Yeah, and this is a question that I've often asked is, if I'm applying for a job and I have an interview, is I say, well, who else is in the team, or what projects have you done? How did those projects go? If it's a business stakeholder, I ask, have you worked with data scientists before? How was the experience? What were the successes? What were the challenges? Just to try to get a feel for, do you expect the data scientist to solve all your problems magically? How much time do you have for the data scientist? Like, if I'm supposed to have a business understanding, unless someone can talk to me or you have good documentation as to what the business does, I'm going to struggle. I don't care, because every business, I've worked for 2 large banks in Melbourne, whose businesses are less than a kilometer apart, but very different cultures, very different infrastructure, even if on paper the problem definition is the same. So in terms of, if you're at an interview and you're wondering if this is unreasonable, ask, has it been done before? How was it? What were your expectations? Were they met? Were they exceeded? Where in your data journey am I joining, or would I be joining in on this?
I think there's a consulting piece in there as well, which is like, a consultant, is typically not meant to just take orders, and, you're not meant to just like, okay, here's your burger and fries. Like, it's meant to be, they're trying to figure out what they want and you're meant to help them figure it out. And I think there's an element of that in an interview where you can look at the team and figure out what they've got and say, like, is this a dream team that could use you? Or is this a team where they kind of have your skill set in abundance and kind of need something else? And are they aware or unaware of it? Like, part of that's what you're talking about, is the questions. I think like a big red flag is where there's just no sense of how the bloody hell it would work. And that's typically those companies that are train wrecks, and they need to hire people for that team because ostensibly that team is valuable, but they don't really know why. And they'll typically ask them to do the most basic, boring analysis possible because they have no idea, they have no infrastructure to do that themselves, but they really should. And then they wouldn't need that team in their mind. So I think a lot of it's around, and I've seen, like, I have an old boss who did this really effectively. There's a need to kind of educate and have a conversation where you meet in the middle. Like, they should know that they can't ask for everything yesterday, but you also should know that it's incumbent on you to push back and help them figure out. Like, if you look at designers, like visual designers, when you're building a website, you don't just say build this and they do it. They typically will push back and be really annoying sometimes, but with your best interest in mind, which is like, can we come up with a design that really works? And they need to not just know what you want, they need to know what users want and figure out if I'm telling them the wrong thing. And I think the same thing applies here. Like, if someone says, hey, we need you to build a model, the question should be understanding why and whether there's a cheaper way to do it. Whether, what's the context of the business, how are you going to work on this? Do you have someone that can, you can work with to answer questions, etc. That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's something I've certainly used in the past to ask, if I build you this model, what will you do with it? And sometimes they know, and sometimes they don't. But I don't think it's a bad thing if they know they don't know what they want. So if they say, hey, we're new to this analytics thing,
totally,
can you scope it out for us? Can you give us some potential use cases? Can you come in and spend a month sitting with us and looking at what we have, and just give us your 2 cents worth? I wish I could get more of that work, because oftentimes, as you say, you do kind of come in and you're like, oh, this is a mess. Their data don't talk to each other. They don't have keys without it. They have all these vendor solutions that getting data from the back end is hacky at best. Or maybe it'll let you export the data that whoever designed this third-party system thinks you might want, and you can kind of use it for a lot of things, but not really drilling down. So oftentimes, if I see these very, not necessarily at the start of their data journey, but let's say that as a simplification, and you'll get these job ads where they want everything.
Yes.
But they don't really want everything. They want something, and they don't know what it wants. So they take a very wide net and cast it out. And so they'll say they want Python and R, and they've heard of this thing called Julia and this language called Scala. So maybe if they ask for everything, they'll get someone who knows something and can help them.
They want someone who's good at their job. And they're just listing as many possible things as possible, assuming that if you tick all of those, you must be great. Not realizing no one really does, and the people that do won't be what they want.
Yeah,
And
or you get this thing where, you should have these 5 programming languages, and recent grads are like, yeah, we had an assignment where we had a demo of that software. So yeah, I know that software. I've seen this demo.
yeah, totally.
I had a student who was asking for help applying, who said he knew SAS, and I'm like, oh, how do you know SAS? He's like, oh yeah, we had this thing in class. I'm like, oh, so do you have a license? Have you practiced the code? No. I'm like, oh, so saying SAS is because you've seen it used and you understand the concepts is different from here's 2,000 lines of code. It's yours now. Merry Christmas. we need it modified to return different results next week. Go, because SAS. And, that kind of opened his eyes a bit. So I am concerned that when companies ask for 20 things, they're going to get applications that say they know 20 things.
Yeah. I think there's the big challenge here is that they're describing absolutely nothing of like how the team works and how the team will work. Like, what's the problem you're solving and how is that problem solved? Like, what are the typical steps in the process, and where is this person required? Are they doing everything? Are there other people currently helping? Because I'd say that if you're an aspiring data analyst, or you're in the early steps of your career, the focus should just be, how do you figure out requirements and understand what you need to do? Like, make sure that they have a question that's sensible. So someone's like, I want to measure, how I want to know like how often people are, doing this behavior on our, in our product. And then it's like, okay, well, measuring how often, like, what does that mean? Like, you get a whole bunch of, like, what is the actual event that you want to track? Who are the people that could do this? Are you going to just give them counts, like at a weekly level? Like, what period of time is it counts? Are you going to have like some kind of engagement metric? What's the proportion of people that do this? In which case, what's the numerator? What's the denominator? Just simple stuff like that, like basic kind of, that's where you kind of need your, it's not really statistical training, but it's kind of that quantitative bent where you can turn their idea into something that's quantified. And then how do you go out and extract that? And in what environments can you do that? And that goes to your point, which is like the technology is like, do you need there to be a reasonably maintained SQL database, and then you put into Excel? Is that your workflow? In which case, just get really good at that. Or I use SQL and R. And I'd probably have a first citizen and a second citizen, like in terms of how I work. Like, I'd say my first citizen's R, and then my second citizen Python. I will R and SQL first, and Python second. And I obviously can use Excel, but I'll do it. I'll do it only with a gun to my head. Or not quite that bad, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'll typically avoid it.
Right, but this is something that I think plays in, because that example of when people interact with your site, how do you count it? Because in my opinion, if you have a job ad that's looking for everything, that tends to mean they don't know what they want, and so go to them with what you can do.
Yeah.
So if you went to them and said, okay, so you've got this retail site, you're doing things, and what I've done is look at the question of what should be the numerator, what should be the denominator. That am I looking at clicks or click rates, conversions, conversion rate, average unit sale? These are the different metrics I have experience with. And if you're a grad, it could be through a Kaggle competition. It could be through a homework assignment. It could be because you've read blogs or done some other course or whatever. But just to say, I understand these concepts, and using these tools, SQL and R, Python, Scala, whatever it is, using these tools, I can help you create the dashboards, make the models, right? Because if the company doesn't know what they want and you go to them and say, I can do this, is that what you want? In my opinion, that's stronger than saying, and then I can do everything for you, because you can't.
Yeah. Like, you can paint a much better picture than like, I can, here are all the hats I can wear, rather than, as opposed to, here is like, let me learn a bit about your company, find out what you actually need, and then I can just try and paint a picture of how I think I can work, with some basic assumptions around you having, like, ask if they have a database that you could access, ask if they have what tools the analysts typically use. And then you can say, all right, in this environment, you can quickly identify in your head whether or not you can easily contribute, or whether you'd have to learn. And if you have to learn, you can maybe be upfront and tell them, like, look, I have to learn to improve my Python, but I've learned a bit of Pandas. I'm keen to learn more. That way you're talking about, you're open about the gaps, but also if you can tell them how you can contribute, that's a lot more compelling than I can do the coding stuff. Give job to me, smart.
Yeah.
Which is like what they're kind of asking you to say. To be honest, go on.
Yeah, certainly. I think that just talking about, well, I have this degree. Well, everyone in your graduating class has that degree. And all the people that graduated the semester before you have that degree, and they have a semester of experience. So in my opinion, it's not about the skills, but this is what I can do to help. And these are what my strengths are. Because, and that way, if you're there talking about all these metrics and I come in and say, oh, and then I use R and I'm going to put a shiny layer on top of it so we can do some exploration. And then using our markdown, I'm going to automate the slides out the other side so that as you're sitting down with your BI team, you can go through lots of things and then create this PowerPoint, which will then be emailed to you, manager. Is that what you need? Do you need someone to sit down and go through these reams of data and find out what's interesting and send it to you? Or do you need someone like you were saying of, well, what are the metrics I should be tracking? How should I get them? What are the data concerns, right? And so now for a company that doesn't know what they want, they have this choice as opposed to, yes, I do data science, and so do you.
Yes. Maybe just for reference, you said a shiny layer on top of it. For those who aren't in the know, or maybe what the Python users or the Excel users, I'm talking about our shiny dashboard, specifically the shiny package. It allows you to do some cool shit, and you should see what Craig does with it. It's some of the best stuff I've seen.
Pretty cool, and it's that. But so this is one of the problems I'm currently facing is I'm saying, okay, you need these reports done. I can automate that for you. But that's not really data science. That's not really data analysis. That's process improvement. That's even if it's all done with R code or SQL code, right? So it's programming, but it's a reporting role, but it's not a reporting role. So it's kind of like I have this problem of I don't like I'm your square peg look in front of all these round holes.
You're a knight that's meant to be like fighting on the battlefield, but they're using you to chop meat with your your sword.
Yeah, with my sword, and I've got a shield going. What do I do with this? When they throw tomatoes at me, I can block or something. I don't know. Right?
I've had a job that was basically all that. It was basically me not being a data analyst and just doing data management. I improved my SQL a lot, and I learned.
Oh yeah,
I learned a lot. And that actually brings me to a question I had for you, which is: are there certain jobs that like if you're a grad, and we hinted at things that are just bad matches, bad fits. Are there certain types of environments that you think are just not good for any data analyst or for certain data analysts, particularly like people earlier on in their career? What do you think?
Yeah, for me, that this goes a lot bigger. There are just let me back up. In my opinion, it's more important who you work for than what you work on.
Oh, totally.
Because if I have an understanding manager who's like, look, Craig, we need this done in Excel. I'm sorry. You can do some R code afterwards, but right now I just need this done by next week. It's in Excel. I'm terribly sorry, but get it done. I can deal with that versus someone who's saying, okay, Craig, you say, R shiny and R markdown, give it to me tomorrow. By the way, I don't know what condition the data is in, figure it out.
Yeah.
Go, right? Like,
yeah.
If you have someone that will indulge you, who if you say, hey, I want to do this machine learning, and they say, well, so long as you have all your work done, let's talk about what types of things you can do, and they'll support you in this, and they'll nurture you and let you run in a direction. And if it doesn't work out, we'll say, well, thanks for trying. But, it didn't work. Sorry.
I have a great extreme version of that where I had a great boss, but the people on the client services side were essentially selling stuff that wasn't analytics for analytics people to do. And so my job was to go in and figure out, who spent money on what, who's met a certain spend threshold. And if they have, they then qualify for certain gifts. And then I had to go out and make sure that they got those gifts, and the gifts were given through it was through another program. It was like a collaborative partnership essentially. So I had to then just send a list of essentially like unique IDs from the other system to them, so they know who qualified and who didn't. And that was the job. That was part of the job. Like it would be something I did every week. I had to set it all up and do that and identify who'd spent enough. And this was stuff that was, and I was just told, like, when I joined, like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, firstly, I have no idea what the hell that is. And how it someone else had set up something before, and it was not set up very well. They did it in a rush because they were given no time as well. And it was just a company that they had no sense of, I mean, not the company, but like this person had no sense of how to use analytics. It was all like, for her, data stuff is data stuff. You data monkey, you know, play your little data monkey drum. And so like, yeah, it's an environment where like you might have to take a bit of an L and work in a job like that if you don't have any other options available to you. Like I definitely grabbed everything I could to get into the industry. But once you get a certain level of experience, within 1 to 2 years, you should be looking to go somewhere that's really good. And by really good, I mean like a place where there's a mature practice, where people know what they're doing, where there are people working there that you want to be like at some point in the future because they're very good at their jobs, and you have leadership that get it and don't kind of ask you, like I said, just to do everything tomorrow and have no idea what the hell it is that you do and why it's valuable, and don't get that you actually are interested in certain things and not interested in others, and that you are hired to do the things that you're interested in, but that these things are all kind of off limits because, if they want you to clean the toilets, get a cleaner, like not data analyst. Like there's certain things that are in your role and certain things that are not. So like, yeah, if you get stuck in a role where you're using the wrong technology, doing things that you're not interested in, that doesn't align with your future plans career-wise, like, yeah, you got to get out. Like,
it's simple. And something I recommend to everyone, but especially grads, is to have boundaries about what you will and won't do, and try your best to stick to them. There was a project I was on when we asked one of our teams to manually go through and copy and paste data and ensure that it matched. And these are people with data science titles, copying and pasting data into Excel from old solution, new solution, verify it matched. And it decimated the company's reputation for a generation of grads, because these data scientists getting excited to do some modeling, copy paste all day for a month, and surprise, surprise, they all left. Yeah. So there is a little bit of, you need to take an L sometimes, as you said, if it's your first job, if you have reasons for, desperation comes to mind. But make sure you have lines as to what isn't okay. There's certainly some obvious ones. Don't do anything illegal, right?
Obviously. But then there are other ones, which is where it's kind of embarrassing to your decency, I guess. And dignity. I think, and it's hard as well. Like there will be times when they just like it'll kind of be like do it or leave, and at that point, that's when you find an exit strategy. And like I think the thing that is good for you, the thing that's if you get a job that sucks, yes, it sucks, and if they make you work long hours, it's hard to apply for other roles. But having a foot in the door, even if you've been somewhere for a few months only, if it's really bad and just not what they advertise, and I'm not saying like go around and job hop. Like I try to be loyal wherever possible. If I'm somewhere I hate, if I've got a good boss, I'll typically talk to them, and they'll typically hate it too. And we'll have a plan on how we make a difference. Like I try to have a bit of a Mary Poppins thing where I go in and make things nicer, make things better, and then leave. But if you're someone that is terrible, you do have the fact that you've got a job now, and having a job makes it easier to find a job. If you're unemployed, recruiters just don't know if you're any good or not. If someone else has hired you, you can always explain to them that, what they advertised was not really what you're doing, and it's not aligned to your strengths. This is what you're interested in. And I find that most people are pretty understanding of that, because it just happens all the time. Certainly not saying that they're a bunch of like, twats and saying something really, really rude about them. Like if you keep it professional and just say like, look, they hired me in good faith, thinking this is what I'd be doing, thinking this is what data science is. And then it turns out that their department doesn't do that at all. And that was an honest mistake, and it's just a poor match.
Yeah, and it can go the other way, that if you grad out there think you really want to do data science, but then you find out about data governance, or you find out about change management, or you find out about data visualization or front-end work or data translating or whatever, and you can talk to your boss. Hopefully your boss is good, as we were saying. And if hopefully they can open those opportunities for you. But even if they can't, if you say, hey boss, look, can you give me a reference? Will you serve as a referee? Because actually this is the path I want to go down. If you're with someone good, like all of this adds up in your favor.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that would be one of my things of what to avoid is, it sounds kind of obvious, but don't work for a psychopath. Don't work, only work for people that will acknowledge your humanity throughout your tenor,
Yeah.
wherever you are. Anyone who refers to people as resources or units or FTEs or something, especially since I normally work part-time, when someone refers to me as, a 0.6, it's a bit like, I'm sorry, what? Are you saying that because I only spend fewer hours here, I'm less of a person? Is that what you mean? It's so watch out for some of that language, that you always want to be with someone who values you as an individual, even if it is just, hey, what did you do last weekend?
Yeah, they should. Yeah, like, I think those people that where you work with them and they just know nothing about them and they know nothing about you, especially if they know nothing about you, it says that they just got zero curiosity about you as a person. That's a problem. Because in the job interview, they'll be in their best behavior. They have zero skin. They have very little skin in the game. Like, I mean, obviously, if they just don't give a shit about you because they see you as an expendable hire, then that's just bad, because they're not going to get better than that. Like, I think if you get a bad vibe from someone, just be aware that the vibe will be that bad or worse, most likely, unless they're just having an off day. But chances are, when the shit hits the fan and deadlines are slipping and they need something urgently, they'll be far less civil than they are in the job interview.
Yeah, and of course that goes the other side. When I was applying for teaching roles, I got really good advice from the chair, who said, look, we understand this is an interview, we understand this is a practice lecture, but we expect you to do everything in this lecture. Now, we don't expect you to do that every day, but incorporate multiple methods of learning, show that you use technology. Like, there was a checklist of things that she said. Yes, we know you're not going to do this every class, but in preparation for the interview, we expect you to go that extra mile. We expect you to have studied. We expect you to be able to answer questions and a list of questions to ask students to incorporate them. And so if you apply that to an interview, that, do some research about the company, ask questions that says, hey, I looked at last year's annual report and it showed this, that, or the other. How is, I see this trend, or I read your strategy document, or I did something else. Whenever I go for an interview, I look, if I have a list of people that will be interviewing me, I look them all up on LinkedIn. Right? It's just this little something extra to say, I care about your company and I care about you.
Yeah. And it's more than curiosity as well. I mean, if you look at a company that's growing massively, doing really well. I mean, years ago, I had a job as an IT salesperson. I was 23. I had no idea what I was doing. I got hired in very strange circumstances. But anyway, I was in this meeting, and like, it was 7:30 in the morning or 7 a.m. start for this, pre-work day meeting, which was like just the consulting, organization I worked for. They did SAP consulting. They were presenting to like one of the big, one of the big manufacturing companies, and it was just, for me, as a 23-year-old, just didn't care about that kind of stuff yet. I found it really dry, and I was struggling to stay awake. And I asked this guy how they were doing, and we finally got out for a coffee, and I was finally able to have a normal conversation and get out of this freaky corporate environment that I found myself in, that I wasn't ready for. And I asked him how they're doing, and he said, "Oh, good, sales are up." And I'm like, "What?" I wanted like a moment of human connection. I felt like I was like, "You're like a robot." But then later I realized, oh no, when sales are up and things are going well, like, people have jobs, they keep them. Like, you get perks and stuff, you get bonuses, you can hire new people, which means that if you're overloaded, you can get extra people in. So if you join a place and their growth is skyrocketing, that's awesome. If you see a place that's like bombing and their stock price is going down, you're probably going to go there and people are going to be kind of panicked and stressed out unless they have like amazing leadership. So it's the kind of thing that's worth looking into, if not for anything else, just for that. And then also, you said stalking on LinkedIn, looking at people have done in the past. Yeah, you can see a lot from their background. You might find out that they've done really technical things, or maybe they're not technical at all, in which case you'll kind of know what kind of conversation to expect. And then maybe your expectations might be completely violated when you meet them in person, which is something you can talk about.
Yeah, I've certainly had that with some recruiters who claim to be technical. You talk to them a little bit, and it's like, you're using all the right words. I'm not sure they're in the right order. So,
It's a syntax problem. Just debug it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is interesting talking about like the different environment of a company. That if a company is doing well, maybe everyone's happy, and that they might have the extra funds to say, oh, you want to try some machine learning? Sure, here's an extra $50K to get a server up and running and start playing around. Like go get some software, go get some infrastructure, just as a trial. Buy however many hours on AWS and Azure and GCP, and just have a go and see what happens. But I don't know if that's the environment you're going into, and they have these expectations of, okay, now we want people to go and try these new technologies that we don't know about. On one hand, if it's doing well, that could be a really great job. On the other hand, as we mentioned earlier, if they don't know what they're doing and they want someone to come in and do it, it could be a disaster. So how do you see that playing out?
In that situation, specifically when they got money or they don't know what to do, that happens a lot. Like it happens in any area, any kind of role where they just hire someone from a completely new side of the business. Like it happens when they get their first engineer, happens when they get their first data analyst. I think it's just, if you go in, and maybe this is just the takeaway message is, if you go into a role and you have and they don't know what they're doing, you'll need to help them figure out what they're doing. So that means you'll need to be willing to be very non-technical and be pretty scrappy in terms of figuring out ways to get shit done. And, build relationships so you can move towards a better kind of situation for them, where there's a bit of strategy, a bit of direction, a bit of technology, and plans to implement things. So like that's what that role would be, and you need to develop that skill set. So if you want to be like the Python guy or girl in a company, and you join a place where they don't know what they're doing, you're not going to get that experience there. So you can learn valuable things, but you'll be basically stakeholder management plus probably lots of Excel. That's the most likely prognosis in that situation. Not bad, because you can learn Python on your own and get another job later. But yes, it's just about you figuring out what the job actually is, sense making, and then making a call based on what your options are.
Yeah, and I do think it's worth understanding that, and I do think it's a red flag if you look at something and it seems like they're asking for everything, because more likely they want someone to help them start their analytics journey or start their data science journey. Yeah, maybe they have all the data engineers and they have all the data in the cloud or in Spark or in Hadoop, as we used to say, or in this fancy new toy. And now that they have the data, they need to prove their ROI. And so they need someone to do something with it. And so if you are that Python expert, make sure you understand under what conditions you can use Python. If it is, hey, you give me a CSV file with a target clearly identified, I can get you a really low mean squared error or a really high accuracy and recall or whatever else, right? It is a very different value proposition to, well, let's look at your data and let's look at your use cases and let's make sure your data reflect your use cases. And then let's build out the data pipeline, and let's just make sure if you look at something that has everything, I know it may be tempting, but really my honest recommendation is don't say, and yes, by the way, I can do everything.
Oh, yeah. Definitely don't negotiate what your job actually is, because they don't know. I'm going to bring a mildly inappropriate metaphor. You can tell me if this is all right. But essentially, it's like a very young person talking about what they want in a partner. Yeah. It's like when you're really young, you want everything, and you kind of want someone who's everything to you, that is everything you possibly ask for. Basically, you want like a magical unicorn in a cloud somewhere. And it's just like, no. Reality says that you just need to find someone who compliments you and meets a few basic things, and that should be your goal. And if they're asking for that, there's that expectation management piece that will be tough, because they'll realize that it's not going to be like When Harry Met Sally, or I don't know, whatever movie they based their idea of romance on. I'm taking this metaphor and putting it.
well, When Harry Met Sally is funny because in that movie they spend many years before they get together.
I know,
many years before.
I was wondering if you pick up on that. Okay, sorry. Maybe it's not going to be like The Notebook, or it's not going to be like Twilight. It's going to be quite different. It's going to be realistic. It's going to be like
all right. I do think there is an entire other show on comparing dating to interviewing and job seeking, and all of the,
and how they shouldn't be mixed. Like
stories. Well, there's that too.
Getting asked out after interviews or on LinkedIn. Don't hit on people on LinkedIn.
Don't hit on people on
other
LinkedIn.
Places to do that are better, where they'll be expecting.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Let that be the take-home message.
Yeah, well, it's an unreasonable expectation. If there's a job ad, then someone starts flirting with you, don't be on either side of that conversation.
No.
My advice there. But yeah, but it's also kind of scary if you're new to the field to try to develop your value proposition, but it should be your value proposition. You shouldn't ask me what your value proposition should be.
Yes.
Because if I give you my value proposition, I have experience with it, I'm going to beat you. You don't want to compete with me. Right? And you can hear it in people's voice if it's something they care about. And this is, that's another one of these interview things that people publish interview questions and you parrot them off, many of which is something you can Google. But if you're talking about something you've done or something you're passionate about, it will come out in your voice, and it will be obvious to the people interviewing you.
Yeah.
So the more you can talk about what you like and why, the better. Yeah. Like practice learning how to tell that story in a way where you don't get lost and trip up on the details, but that should be 100% authentic. And it's like, it's a thing that changes the conversation completely from like, I want job to I'm excited about something, and, people will connect with that. Yep. But that pretty much wraps it up for this week. Yeah. Thank you to Matt for asking, what about a second set of bionic eyes? To which I replied with a smiley face. Not sure. We've got a like, so we did actually have a comment this week. Comment spaghetti if you saw the whole thing. I don't think anyone's used the whole thing. If they see this bit, they can say spaghetti. They can say spaghetti. I did get a spaghetti last week. Really? So yeah, I got a spaghetti last week. So that was fun. But yeah, it doesn't help that we're irregular about when we do these. Now that we're not doing anything with video, I'll probably be turning all these into podcasts, but we are still YOLOing it. So if you have any advice or anything you'd like to hear about, please leave us a comment. Yeah, we're happy to talk about anything you find useful, because that's probably the main goal here. Yeah, it is aimed primarily at junior data scientists or people seeking a career, but we might have guests on the podcast one week that we've discussed, Jahan. Yeah. A certain friend of ours. Yes. To get more perspectives, because ultimately, as we've been saying, that the goal is to be part of a team and to bring what you bring to this team, and whether that's Python, modeling, mathematics, statistics, visualization, whatever your personal value is. So we want to get more perspectives about how everyone works together, so that you don't end up with these unreasonable expectations. So you don't end up in these, we need to build value now, go bring it for us. One thing at a time. Make the rainforest happen right now. Go. Yeah. So we'll be back in hopefully 2 weeks, but it might be 3 because, we'll see how we go. Yeah. Thanks all. All right. Thanks everybody. Thanks for sticking around. So now I'm waiting to have this stop, and then I'll stop streaming. I think we might make it